how to make your CEE audience speak. Hi, I'm Monika Hutnik, and I help leaders learn how to lead their international and virtual teams. Together with my team at ETTA Go Global, we make the change happen by means of training, coaching, facilitation, masterminds, action learning, and any other ways. This podcast, A Step Ahead, has been created for all who want to grow in such an international, remote environment, who want to grow as leaders, HR, change agents, and simply as humans. I'm inviting you here for discoveries and insights. All recordings and materials are available at www.astepahead.pro. Well, if you are listening to this episode, it probably means that you have come across this phenomenon. But anyway, if you are listening just for curiosity, we are starting our conversation today from a few anecdotes, and then we will point out some of the root causes for what you might be experiencing or observing in presentations that you are giving to CEE groups, Central Eastern European groups. And then we close with finally giving hints on how to activate the audience in our region of the world, the Central Eastern European countries. And even though we will mostly showcase Poland, as this is where we are located, there is a huge common heritage in business behaviors among all of the countries here in our region, Central Eastern European region. Well, coming from the infamous times behind the Iron Curtain, when protecting yourself against the overwhelming system, including not standing out, was a common survival strategy. So this is why what we discuss remains relevant to all CEE countries. When you cooperate with people from Poland, especially when you run meetings or when you run trainings, meetings that might be face-to-face or that might be online, many of my international colleagues, especially those coming from the Western European and Northern American countries, feel a bit insecure about, how to read the reactions from us. Yes, from us, meaning Polish people, but also generally people in the Central Eastern Europe, because it seems that the type of reaction, the type of behaving in meetings is shared in our part of Europe. Now, today we are meeting with Małgosia Miętkiewicz. Małgosia, you will tell me what's the English version of your name, okay?
Sure. Hi, Monika. Hi, everyone. And thanks for having me here. My name is Małgorzata, which is a very long and complicated Polish name, Małgorzata Miętkiewicz. So I go by the name Gosia, which is a shorter, more international form of my name. And I'm a cross-cultural psychologist, linguist. I've also been a cross-cultural trainer, and I have 12 years of experience. I've been working in international settings for 12 years, leading global teams, international projects. I also lived abroad for a while. When I was in high school, I graduated from a high school in Costa Rica. And I'm Polish, by the way, so that gives me an additional insight into the topic that we will be discussing today. I have this insider perspective, and at the same time, I'm an outsider as well, because I research cultures and I try to take an outside and objective look at the Polish culture and Polish work culture. So it's an interesting perspective, and I'm looking forward to our exchange, Monika.
Very much. So same here. And I'm very glad that we united our forces to help our international colleagues understand what's going on in those meetings here in the Central Eastern Europe. So what are some of the situations that we've been encountering? I remember a project that I ran with a colleague from UK. This project was actually a part of a transformation in an Italian manufacturing company. Together, we were delivering a training for the Polish-speaking leadership team in one of the factories here in Poland. Now, even though the training was run in English, there was this kind of a lack of synchrony between the speaker my colleague, and the audience. It seemed that the more he tried to activate them, the more quiet they became. Now, I was really watching him in action and I could see his positive intention, but I couldn't stop myself. I took his sleeve and I said, David, please just keep quiet for a moment. Let them speak. And it was a magic moment when he understood that maybe his way of activating the audience was not what the audience actually needed. And I know, Małgosia, you've had such situations in your experience as well.
Yes, and just to quickly comment on what you just said, Monica, I think that at least in Poland, we can sometimes be overwhelmed or intimidated by very extroverted speakers and presenters because that's not our natural presentation style or interaction style. So the audience might have been overwhelmed in that situation. And I think from my observations and experience, people often need time to digest the energy of the speaker and also all the content that's been shared. So that might have been the lacking element, and I think you did the right thing in kind of stopping him and trying to create a moment to breathe in that particular setting. I also recall a situation from 10 years ago approximately. In one of the companies I worked in, there was a group of German colleagues that came to give some presentations in front of Polish colleagues. They came to train us on some new processes that we were learning. And I remember how confused our German colleagues were when they were giving those presentations rich in content. They were really engaged, and they would pause every now and then to check in with the audience. Do you have any questions? Are there any questions? Is there anything I can clarify for you? And they were very keen on receiving those questions, but what they encountered most of the time was silence on the Polish side. And whenever they would ask, are there any questions, there was immediate silence in the room. People were looking down, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be checking their notes or writing something down, as if they were just praying not to be the ones to speak up or not to be called out to speak up. And that's a reaction that you can often observe in Poland. And I know that the colleagues from Germany were very confused. And the feedback I heard from them after the presentation was that they thought the audience was completely disengaged, not motivated, not caring enough to start a debate of any kind, or maybe they completely lost the point and they were so lost and didn't understand anything, so they wouldn't even know where to start asking or where to start commenting on the topic of the presentation. So that was the perception on the German side. While in Poland, I must say it's quite common to be confronted with silence on the audience side. And I think we will get to the details in a minute of why that is and the background of that. But it's a situation that really stayed with me, and I wanted to share it today.
Absolutely. That resembles many of my observations in international groups with international speakers. So the question is how to read the reactions of audience. Many of my American colleagues presenting to audience from CEE claim that they feel a bit discouraged because of the blank gaze, a face which according to their perspective don't show any emotions. It's very hard for them to read whether the perception, the reception of the audience is positive or negative. So even to such a respect of feeling personally threatened by an audience that wouldn't really give enough feedback. But now it seems that these audiences do give a lot of feedback as we are able to read them quite well. It's just a matter of what's the level of expectation that you set and what hints do you notice.
Yes, and I would even go one step further, and I would say that it's not that it's hard to read any kind of reaction. I would say that in Poland, we tend to be either neutral, poker face, or negative. I think those negative reactions, you can pick up on them quite easily when it comes to the facial expressions, the voice, the body language, this, closed posture, crossing your arms as a gesture of skepticism, frowning your forehead. So there are some verbal cues, non-verbal cues, and I would say yes, we can be either neutral or quite negative in the reception of the presentation. And that's the thing. on the one hand, sometimes people are shy and they don't speak up and they don't ask questions. Whereas, going back to the previous examples for the German colleagues, any question was a sign of interest. And people who would be asking even about the obvious that was already stated in the presentation would reassure German colleagues because it was a sign for them, okay, this audience is engaged. That's what they were expecting. Whereas in Poland, it's like, if it's obvious, then don't ask, don't comment. It's not necessary to comment if we are all on the same page. So why would I say it out loud? Or there is also this fear of judgment, fear of being ridiculed, especially in a bigger group. Am I in the right place? Am I asking the right question? Am I not going to make a fool out of myself if I ask something about something that is obvious? So I would say those are some of the common fears and reactions. And it's interesting that on the other hand, on the other spectrum, we as Polish people, can sometimes be quite confrontational. So it's not intuitive because on the one hand, we can be quite neutral, no reaction. But when we do speak up, when we are asked about our opinion, we can be quite confrontational, and it's easier for us to point out the negative things, to be skeptical, than to praise, to give positive feedback, positive reinforcement. And you mentioned American colleagues earlier on, and I think it can be particularly discouraging for Americans who are so used to this sandwich feedback, and they are so used to giving positive reinforcements. And when they are confronted with Polish attitude and this ease with which we can criticize and find flaws in things and point out what doesn't work, it can be very discouraging for some cultures like the American culture, where you are supposed to balance your communication style and always search for the positive stuff that you can notice and point out.
By the way, when we talk about that, it all starts from the very beginning, meaning small talk, which in some cultures of the West is very popular and well developed. And at least this is what we have in common with our German colleagues, that we are not masters of small talk. That's a skill that we would need to learn, being exposed not only to working internationally, but to working internationally with specific cultures, with cultures of the Western Europe and of the Northern America especially. Now, we do exchange small talk, but maybe it has a different feeling, a different taste, and it doesn't come up front in the beginning of the conversation, and it only is developed with some. There was this case which I experienced last year. I was waiting to get into a manufacturing company to deliver a training, and it was an American-owned business. So we all needed to get those ID cards to be, well registered when we entered the factory as aliens. Now, I was waiting in a queue and right behind a bunch of people who seemed to be, enjoying themselves, exchanging jokes, even though a little bit, superficial chit chat, but still they did all they could to show that, it's a good day. And they were followed by 2 or 3 other people who were just, standing in a line, keeping quiet, not really chit-chatting to each other, maybe even avoiding eye contact. It seemed they didn't know each other so well. And let me ask you, which of them were the Americans and which of them were the Polish guests to that side?
Yes, I think I know the answer to that question. So people kind of trying to shut themselves down or separate themselves and avoiding eye contact and not really being chatty. Those would definitely be Polish colleagues, while the Americans would naturally be more open, extroverted, looking to bond and to network with people, even if it comes to, let's say, what we would call a superficial talk. Like we would only share, I don't know, the same space for 5 minutes, but it's still nice to make a conversation. Whereas in Poland, it's not always the case. And it's funny, like small talk is not our natural habitat, so to speak. And we are not the masters of small talk. It can be learned, it can be mastered over time. And it's a common topic that Polish people ask about during intercultural trainings, or they attend entire workshops or webinars on the art of small talk, because it's something that is not intuitive in our culture. We would rather have this small talk that we call authentic, which can be focused also on the negative aspects, like, oh, my kid is sick again, oh, weather sucks, and things like that. So I think we take
I
the
immediately
proverb.
feel good when you mention that.
Yes, and I
I
think
feel I'm able to make a connection, yes, as a
yeah,
Polish
yeah,
person, because
yeah.
I also have some failures or difficult moments in my life.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think we really take the proverb misery loves company to our hearts, because we are looking for someone to share our pains or struggles with. We just want to feel relieved, or we want to reassure ourselves that we are not the only ones who are not having the greatest day of our lives. And I think this is what connects people and brings them closer. And historically, if you look at Poland, at all the hardships that we went through over the past centuries, I think it was kind of a coping mechanism, survival mechanism, being able to identify your crowd, build a community around, a shared pain or a shared negative experience that would kind of give you some identity and some motivation to go through it together.
Yes, so that's the reason when you enter a room physically to present something as a speaker, you wouldn't naturally feel those or hear those little jokes or this little chit chat, which might be expected in some other audiences coming from other cultures. But when you present in a professional setting, there is also a matter of respect that goes along your position in the company.
That's true. And when we think about the cultural dimension called power distance, identified by Gerd Hofstede, the power distance in Poland is quite big, meaning hierarchy is still quite prevalent, and things like power, status, someone's job title or position in the hierarchy are indicators of how you should behave around that person. Of course, I'm generalizing here. I'm talking about the culture as a whole. We've got generational differences coming into play, and there is now a strong trend to build more egalitarian cultures and dialogues built around partnerships. But historically, again, or if you work with people 35 plus, 40 plus, you would still encounter those patterns, and this thinking is quite deeply embedded into the Polish psyche. Power and status are important, so you wouldn't necessarily want to contradict your speaker or correct them if they are senior to you, meaning older. Again, higher up the hierarchy ladder, you would feel like every time you speak up, you are taking up space. So you start thinking, is it going to be worth my speaker's time? Is it going to be relevant for the entire audience? If there are 20 people in the room and I'm the only one with this question, maybe it's not worth, troubling everyone with that question and taking up time and space to ask it, because it might not be of interest for others. So there is a strong consciousness of time and deadlines and punctuality, and meetings are supposed to be efficient. But again, it's very deeply connected as well with the power distance, respect for the speaker that we talked about.
Absolutely. And also watching the group, as you said. I've just been in an international project launch where we were getting information about the project characteristics, specifics. Now, at the end, there was a section of, do you have any questions? And let me tell you how surprised I was when my Spanish colleague just started asking about the Spanish group. And I said, cannot she notice that there are 11 other people here and none of them is having a Spanish group and we are just, using our time? Why wouldn't she ask a question that would be relevant to everybody? And that would be something typical for a Polish way of thinking, or for this way of thinking that we are learned in the Central Eastern Europe here. When you have a question that is relevant to everybody, you are welcome to ask. But when you have your particular question about your particular case, about your particular situation, something that would be very adequate to ask in the Western meetings is not well received here. It's as if you were blowing your own horn, being oblivious about the other people in the room, being in fact disrespectful about their time and their energy that they are putting in the meeting. Maybe that's also another reason why Polish people are so hesitant to ask questions in meeting. But watching the group is another important aspect, and we could relate it to collective thinking.
Yes, definitely. And also building on what you said, Monica, sometimes there is also an interesting observation that we can make in the meetings. So when there is a Polish group and there is a speaker, there are no questions from the audience during the presentation. But then once the meeting is over and people start leaving the room, sometimes you can observe a nice long queue to the speaker because people want to ask questions one-on-one. And they wouldn't ask a question in a group setting, but they would seek an individual consultation or clarification after the presentation. And the first reason for that is, as you said, getting self-aware and self-conscious in front of the group, not wanting to take up the time and space if something is not relevant for the majority. And on the other hand, I think the fear of judgment, and the tension and the pressure is also a bit off when it's a one-to-one situation. And people would sometimes say, if I ridicule myself, at least I will do it in front of one person and not in front of the entire
In a
room.
trusted contact.
Yes, yeah, and I think it goes back to very early days, the education system in Poland and the way we are brought up. And again, it's changing for the better. But speaking of a professional setting where you work with 30, 40, 50-year-olds, this way of thinking and socializing and this mentality is still quite present nowadays, because our education system unfortunately embeds a fear of failure and ridicule in us. Teachers in Poland, I'm talking about teachers, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I heard it's progressing for the better, but 20, 30 years ago, it was a trend that teacher would discourage asking questions. You were supposed to listen to the teacher, to their lecture, and not question them. You would also be ridiculed in front of the other kids in the classroom if you asked a stupid question. You could hear something like, "Oh, Monica, once again you didn't listen to the teacher. Pay more attention." Things like that. So the culture of pointing out flaws and mistakes and what doesn't work, it's something that we get from school. Teachers can be quite critical in their feedback and also biased, noticing the mistakes, focusing on the errors, and not really building on the potential of the child, reinforcing the strengths of the child. And the intention is good. It comes from the place, from the position of care. I care about you, so I will point out your mistakes so that you don't make them again. So it's coming from a good place, but the way it's received and the way it's internalized by kids and teenagers and adults that they become, it's translated into an enormous fear of failure. There is also the topic of perfectionism and the huge uncertainty avoidance that we have as Polish nation. And it's quite funny that in all the culture dimensions, if you look at them, we are somewhere in the middle. But when it comes to uncertainty avoidance, so having this need of being reassured, receiving very precise instructions and clear communication, that's something that we see a lot. And there is sometimes when it comes to presenting or asking questions as a person in the meeting, sometimes something so simple as a language barrier can come into place. Because when I talked about the fear of failure and the perfectionism that is expected by teachers, I'm also referring here to the way we are taught languages in Poland. So you're expected to know your grammar and the words and all the rules. Everything should happen by the book, but you are not encouraged to speak or to speak up or to practice in a classroom of 20, 30 kids. That's even barely feasible for every kid to have a conversation with the teacher and to receive such customized attention and teaching and focus from the teacher. So what happens is that people have brilliant ideas or they've got millions of questions in their heads, but sometimes they think, oh, what if I make a linguistic mistake when speaking up? I don't want, again, to look like a fool if I don't use the right grammatical tense or whatever. So sometimes there is also the issue of language.
Indeed, and this wish to speak perfectly when we speak a foreign language, especially to our British or American or Canadian colleagues who are native speakers, might be a little bit overwhelming. So we've just discussed many of the root causes why an audience from Central Eastern European countries might be a bit more hesitant to take active part in meetings, might be a little bit more quiet, might need a little bit more time or a little bit more privacy or other context to ask questions. We've discussed not being, experts in presenting ourselves, the small talk thing, the power distance and the respect that comes along, the group orientation, and this uncertainty avoidance, plus all the impact of the education system that it has imprinted on us. Now we will soon go into giving hints and tips on how to activate the audience. But I thought there is one important thing that we need to state here. Now, many of these challenges that we are discussing here are becoming active or visible only when people from this region of Europe interact with people from the countries of Western Europe and Northern America. On the contrary, when we interact with people from Eastern countries, like Asian countries, some of the countries of Africa, we might be perceived as those who are super active, overactive, and overwhelming to the audience, or not really being able to read the subtle cues. So I want to highlight this very much, that this specific dynamic is present here in our meetings and relationships. But surely we get a lot of exposure to these, as quite a big part of investments in Poland comes from the countries of the West. Now, how to activate the CEE audience in meetings, that's what we would like to finalize with a bunch of hints and tips, hopefully useful to our listeners.
Right, because we want to make it constructive. We talked a bit about the historical context, the root cause, just to paint the picture. But in order to leave you with some takeaways and reflections, I think it's important to talk about the hints and tips and what we can do to improve the cooperation and the engagement level. So some things that I notice work quite well in practice, and they are positively received by Polish audience or Central Eastern European audience. Don't surprise people. So give them a heads up, give them time to digest and to prepare if you're going to call them out in a meeting. So a good practice would be to already include the aim of the session and the agenda in the meeting invitation. And you can also additionally follow up by email. With regards to the meeting we'll have next week, here are some points I would like you to think about or to prepare for the meeting. So it's good to set the expectation in the agenda or in the invitation that there will be a slot for a Q&A sessions, or that all the participants will be asked about their input. It's important to state the why. So it's important to explain why this input will be important, why your voice matters, what is your role in that meeting, because since the decision-making style in Poland can sometimes be more top-down than bottom-up, sometimes people feel like their voice doesn't matter because, my boss will ultimately make a decision anyway. So highlight the importance of all the participants in the meeting, outline the role, say why their input is important. It's also good practice to send them a pre-read. So if you're going to share a presentation, and if it's not some confidential content and it's okay to send the slide, send them in advance as a pre-read so that people can get into the topic, and they won't be overwhelmed by the content. They will have time to digest, formulate their opinion, and there is a better chance that they will come to the meeting prepared and more confident to speak up, because they will have some time to structure their thinking.
I would also add on top of what you said, that it's really so important to set the expectation that you will be expecting questions. I was just participating in a similar meeting, and I got the slide deck before. And in a meeting, I thought, why do they discuss the slide deck which I already read? I didn't realize with my Polish mind that I would be expected to ask questions. Well, after so many years of international exposure, certainly I had not only questions, but also the courage to ask questions. But I think setting this expectation very clearly is so important. And I think maybe it also can, resonate with the Polish education system. In fact, when the teacher says what she wanted to say, she doesn't expect questions at school. Yes, she only expects the class to take it. Okay. And that's it. And I think this expectation that you expect questions it's good to set that clearly.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of setting the expectations, it works both ways. So we should be setting out the expectations towards our audience, as you're saying. At the same time, I encourage everyone to work on setting the expectations or managing the expectations that they have towards working with Polish colleagues or Central Eastern European colleagues. So, for example, if you are American, work on managing your own expectations and just assume it's not going to be the same dynamic as it is with my American colleagues back home. So also work on your own assumptions and expectations towards how interactive and engaging it's going to be. And it's good to come to terms with the fact that each culture is different, and we might not get the same pace of discussion or the same level of passion or extroversion that you might see in some other cultures. And the same goes for Central Eastern European colleagues working, for example, with Asian colleagues, because as you rightly pointed out, it's also relative with cultures, and it's not only a matter of which culture we are talking about, but which two cultures we are comparing and contrasting at a given point in time.
In Poland, it's very rude to interrupt. So if you do not leave a little space for people to speak, they will never want to interrupt you. They will just think that you have overrun the meeting. They might even be angry at you as not being respectful to them.
That's a very valid point again, because as you said, interrupting is not really part of our culture. At the same time, we are quite time conscious, I would say. So it's important to be punctual and structured to make the most out of the
In
meeting.
business,
So
yes, especially in
yes, yeah.
business.
So if we agreed on an agenda, it's important to be respectful and not go beyond that frame. So if you are overtaking the meeting and hijacking the agenda, that's might not be welcome. That will be frowned upon by many Polish colleagues out of respect for time. They might have a reflection afterwards. Oh, this meeting was useless. We didn't come to any conclusions. That person totally hijacked the agenda. We didn't work through all the content and structure that was outlined before the meeting. So again, it's quite important to be time disciplined and to be, precise.
And when this slot for asking questions appears, I think it's also a good idea to encourage people to ask. And just like we were speaking before, ask. There are no stupid questions. Yes, it might also be an encouraging message. Yes, or maybe suggest a few questions that people might want to ask, for a beginning, or some areas that people might be interested in, just to encourage them a little bit. But sometimes it might also be a good idea, especially if you know your people well, if this is your kind of a team that you are in touch with, if you know the people by names, you can also ask the people by name individually.
Yes, it works very well as well. And this sentence that she said out loud, this magical sentence, there are no stupid questions. It might seem like such a simple phrase and stating the obvious, but again, it can work miracles from my observation, because it opens people up. It takes the pressure off them, and it takes us out of this school setting that we talked about, where there is this rigid teacher hunting for mistakes and pointing them out in public. So if someone says there are no stupid questions, they immediately create an inclusive and welcoming atmosphere, and it makes people bolder in asking questions. Another strategy would be to identify formal or informal group leaders in a meeting. There are certain people who are particularly strong and charismatic and persuasive, and the group tends to follow them. So if you are on good terms with these people, you can use them as your advocates, and you can agree with them before the meeting that they would be sharing some comments or questions, because if those group leaders, one or two people, initiate the discussion, it will be easier to get the discussion rolling. calling. It will warm people up. It will invite others to follow and to speak as well. Another hint for the speakers, I would encourage you to be vulnerable, to also open up, maybe share something personal about yourself so that the group can see you as human. And it's particularly important if you're a speaker that is senior in terms of age or experience to the group. We talked about the power distance earlier on, so it's going to be very well received by the group if you also show that you're vulnerable and human. It will open people up. It will remove this barrier of distance and hierarchy that they might have in their heads, and it will also invite them to speak. So those would be some useful strategies as well. Give people the space to speak. Ask specifically about their opinion, because they might think, oh, what does my input matter? Maybe it doesn't matter anyway. But if you persistently ask about their opinion and their input, it will give them a sign. It will send a message that voice is indeed important, because I'm being asked about what I think, what I would recommend, etc. If you're a manager, also it's important that you speak last and you don't give your recommendations up front, because then in more hierarchical cultures, people will tend to just nod their heads and agree with you. So if you really want them to speak their minds, if you really want to hear their perspective, let them speak first, and you just wrap it up, summarize at the very end, and speak last with your personal recommendations.
Absolutely. I'm also thinking about groups which have a mixed composition. There might be people from different countries of Europe, for example. And with high probability, when you run a meeting for such a group, you will see that some people will be very active. They will be resonating with you. Maybe they will be sharing some jokes, or they will be asking questions. But watch out. None of them might be Polish, actually, or Czech, or Slovak, or Bulgarian. Okay. So please don't get tempted to get satisfied with what you received. Those people were just waiting for a moment where they could, with all the respect to the meeting and to the other participants, where they could ask questions. So we actually frequently face such a situations in our online trainings, where we have a group composed of individuals from various countries. And it's a rule, yes, we can almost 100% expect that the speakers from Spain, yes, from Italy, from UK, they will be very lively, they will be spontaneous, they will be taking the stage. But if we only get satisfied with what we get from them, now it seems that we haven't noticed half of the group. Yes, so we need to call the other participants by name. We need to invite them to ask a question, to share a comment, to participate, to contribute. It's just a little bit of this intercultural sensitivity. But there might also be some sensitive meetings where you would share information, or you would discuss issues that are a little bit sensitive to talk about. And in those particular situations, you almost get a guarantee that you will not get any specific interaction from these groups. But we still want to give you a little hint here.
Technology also comes into to help us here. So we should think about the nature of a meeting. If it's an online meeting, there are some great tools for asking questions and getting people's opinions. We've got brilliant tools like Whiteboard or Miro, which is also the equivalent of a whiteboard, where we can brainstorm anonymously and paste post-its with ideas. There are also some fantastic tools for creating polls and surveys and quizzes for people in the room or people in a virtual room. So I'm thinking about tools such as Kahoot or Slido or Mentimeter. So we've got some very helpful tools at our disposal that can help feel the energy of the room and get the opinions of people in a way that is more anonymized and shows aggregated results. So that's one strategy. Another one would be if we are in a bigger meeting and people might feel more comfortable discussing in smaller groups, we can divide them into smaller groups. So let's say we divide 20 people into 5 groups of 4 participants in each group. So we let them discuss in subgroups when they can get a bit more warmed up and bolder in discussing. And then we ask a delegate, a representative of each group, to speak up in the forum and present the outcome of what the group has discussed in a smaller setting. That can help sometimes as well, because people feel like they can be themselves, they can contribute in a smaller forum, and at the same time that voice is then carried further to the forum by a delegate who presents the opinion of the group.
And it's giving a little bow to our collective the collective part of ourselves. And I think it really works well. By the way, those anonymous ways of asking questions using the tools that you mentioned, Małgosia, they can also actually be applied in face-to-face meetings. So obviously we work a lot in the online context. But also, if you have a face-to-face meeting and if you have this kind of a sensitive, area where you still really want to know what people want to ask about or where people have some doubts, why not divide a live audience into those little groups and then ask each of the group to generate questions on this anonymous tool? You will be able to show it on a big board and the people will be able to resonate with it. I think this is a great idea, Małgosia.
Yeah, it increases the interaction, definitely, which we should just remember to give people a heads up before the meeting that they should have their phone with themselves or, their computer, because they will need technology to connect to those tools and give their input. But it's something that definitely facilitates meeting coordination and delivering a meeting successfully.
So I hope that we have shared quite many hints and tips. I hope that you have been able to grab one of them and that you might be able to make use of it. We surely are open to receive your questions or even do a little intercultural training for any of your colleagues or your team or your audience. But I hope that you will be able to make a good start with what you already have and keeping the fingers crossed for you.
Yes, wishing you lots of successful meetings ahead and success engaging your audience.
Let's make it happen. Thank you, Małgosia.
Thank you, Monika.
I hope that now you understand what takes place in presentations for CEE audience. And I hope that by now you also understand why it takes place and that you've got some ideas on what you might do to prevent these situations from happening, or maybe to accept that these situations happen when you are interacting with CEE audiences. If you like to find notes and a short summary of our conversation, you can go directly to the portal astepahead.pro/019. That's the direct address to this particular episode. And by the way, I also recommend the recent episodes which I've published in my channel, Winning Hearts with Storytelling, an amazing conversation directly applicable into your business practice, or the other one, How to Speak 10 Languages, and an amazing conversation with Vladislav Zalechno, who can do it. By the way, what you find on the portal is not just listening, if it was, too little. You also find some very nice articles like the one which is very frequently visited, 7 Things and Plenty Fun Facts You Need to Know About Poland. Yes, please do go to astepahead.pro and find it with your keyword, or the other one on action learning and hints on how you can apply this very innovative and activating way of experiential learning into your company. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being the listener. And one simple thing that you can do to express your support is to give a review wherever you listen. Thank you so much.